Welcome to the Scroll Ensemble Classical Music Improvisation channel. I am Robert. Recently I've been reading Johann Joachim Quantz's autobiography from 1754. If you've been following my channel for a while, you're probably not wondering why, but if you haven't, Quantz was an important musician in the 18th century who wrote an influential flute method. This method deals with more than just flute playing, but also thoroughly discusses ornamentation, harmony, basso continuo, the improvisation of cadenzas, and much more. You can find a playlist of videos I've made so far about learning different things from Quantz when it comes to improvisation. It looks like that, but the link will appear above here. Oh, and I'm still working on the Capriccio video. It's coming, I promise. I'm so sorry. It's taking much more time than I thought it would. It's just a bit more complicated. Finally, there's also a new playlist that I made containing videos from the past, which focus on improvisation in Baroque, in Baroque music. So maybe you also find that interesting. I always find it fascinating to learn more about a musician's life. Of course, for me, with a focus on improvisation. This could paint a picture of the position of improvisation in a musician's daily life. What kind of things people listened out for in improvisation, and possibly also how they approached learning it. Especially since a lot of music history books don't pay much attention to improvisation, but instead heavily focus on written works, I think it's important for my channel to share some of those thoughts. If you find this approach interesting, here are some videos talking about improvisers from the past. Autobiographies are not uncommon in early music history, but in mid-18th century Germany, they seem to have been an especially popular type of publication. For example, Mattheson published his Ehrenpforte, honorary archway, in 1740 with over 150 musician biographies, out of which as many as possible were autobiographies written at Mattheson's request. So he wrote to all these people asking, please tell me about your lives. Oh, and by the way, a spicy fact, Bach is not included in the biographies of these 150 most important musicians. Quantz's autobiography was published in the Historisch-kritische Beiträge zur Aufnahme der Musik, a periodical published by Marburg, devoted to reviews of books about music, short biographies of important musicians, reports on musical inventions, and discussions of theoretical questions. Quantz's love for music started through his brother, who was a village musician playing the bass violin, and whom he heard accompanying the village festivities. What piqued my interest was that his brother did this without any musical knowledge. He didn't read notes, he didn't, train in so much. So basically, like jazz musicians in the past who would learn by going to play at jam sessions. I was also intrigued by Quantz's recognition that this village music perhaps wasn't the best music ever, but still that this was what brought him to music, what inspired him, and maybe also exactly this approach to music that is not as stiff. Quantz learned to play an incredible amount of instruments. A lot of people are aware that musicians were multi-instrumentalists in the past, but listen to this list of instruments. Quantz played mainly the violin, oboe, and trumpet, but also learned to play cornetto, trombones, horn, recorder, bassoon, German bass violin, cello, viola da gamba, and who knows what else, according to himself. Later on, he also learns harpsichord and what was to become his main instrument, the flute. In my own experience, learning different instruments teaches you a lot about flexibility in a way that is very useful for improvisation as well. You never quite know what will come out of your instrument. You're always adjusting, listening, and this can be the same for improvisation, so you can learn to trust your inner musicianship and learn from the different types of music and different functions that specific instruments might have or play. Quantz started feeling more interest in composition and started trying to write down some simple duets, marches, and minuets. I think this is an important aspect of learning in the 18th century that we could emulate more. If you want to learn more about the creative side of things, just start trying. Look at some of the music you find beautiful and try to write something similar. First you will fail, or you will listen to it and be like, why is this so much worse? But then in the process you will learn, trying to see what works and what doesn't. Quantz mentions this, but also Telemann and Bach did this, taking examples from other composers to learn more. And in this case, in this little text, he talks specifically about learning from Vivaldi. So the next bit is not directly about improvisation, but Quantz realizes in 1716, finally arriving in his dream city of Dresden, that music is more than just what is written down. And it's often these elements, like timing, your dynamics, articulation and ornamentation, that are improvisatory and that we also tend to forget about today. When people ask me about learning to improvise, they want to just learn how to add lots of notes. But there's so much more in the performance that we can already add in terms of improvisation. Quantz coins violinist and composer Pisendel as the most influential musician on his development. Quantz also specifically mentions that Pisendel taught him the true art of playing the adagio. As we know from Quantz's Versuch and from later comments in his autobiography, an important element of playing the adagio well is the free ornamentation, and I made a video about that here. I was surprised recently to find out that 18th century musicians would sometimes specifically take lessons in this playing of the adagio. Quantz is a case in point, but also, for example, the violinist Benda and the flautist Dulon. More about them soon. Quantz discusses several famous singers. I don't know how he even remembers all of that, including the range that they were singing. But what is interesting for me is that he also discusses how they performed the adagio. And I will just show you a few of these comments. First, he talks about Senesino, who did not shower the adagio with too many free ornaments. But in contrast, he added the essential ornaments, like trills, with the greatest delicacy. So this is interesting. It seems like Quantz is saying that he was especially good in how he was performing the ornaments, and that maybe, in contrast, he could have added some more free ornaments. Then we have Lotti. Her strength was the performance of the adagio, and especially he was interested in her tempo rubato, so the freedom with timing. And according to him, with her, he heard that the first time. And I think, personally, that's tempo rubato is also a kind of improvisation device. Next, perhaps the most famous of the singers, and of course Quantz says he's also good friends with Farinelli, still writing pen pals and everything. Farinelli was very fruitful in inventing ornamentation, but sometimes because all of this came so natural to him and he was so gifted, he could be a bit too extravagant. Cuzzoni's ornamentation sounded very natural, thanks to her sweet, pleasant and light performance. And I think this is interesting as well. It's not just about which notes you add or how fast you can go, but also how elegant and beautiful you can do those ornaments. And finally, Faustina has a good memory or mind for free ornamentation. So literally the word translates to memory. And I think this is interesting because at least presently, I think it's important for people when you learn to improvise ornamentation to just have a very big vocabulary of options. And I think that's probably what is meant here, that she had really she remembered lots of very beautiful ornaments and she was able to just quickly put them in whenever she wanted to. After Quantz comes back from his travels to Italy, France and England and even the Netherlands, although in the Netherlands there was no worthy music to mention, he has music which he wrote in all those places. He tried to imitate all these different styles. And so when he returned, he didn't immediately want to show his music to the people that gave him money to go and travel, because he realized that what he had written were simply just imitations. And he wanted to work these out a bit more so that he could find his own style, his own voice. And I think when we are improvising or composing nowadays in earlier styles, we're sometimes a little bit stuck in what exactly would they have done, and that's very much bordered off. But perhaps it would be interesting to really try to learn about these earlier styles and as much as we can. But in the end of the day, perhaps after some years of learning and trying, we could still try to also find our own voice, even though there's this famous idea that everything has already been said and composed, blah, blah, blah. And even though it's a language from the past, I still think it's possible. And I was wondering sometimes whether this was a modern idea this finding your own voice. So it is really interesting to see that Quantz literally spells it out here in his autobiography. And maybe you'll find it interesting also to listen to my recent try in this direction, where I wrote a fantasia which was based on Telemann fantasias, but also on the chorale preludes. So I mixed those together, and at least in the repertoire for wind instruments, such a piece, as far as I know, doesn't exist. So it's a kind of my own voice, my own idea, but using stylistic elements from the past. Quantz also mentions the help of Pisendel in judging his improvements when he's come back. If you would like some help with your improvisation, perhaps you would like to join my upcoming online improvisation summer course. More information will be there in this video, which will arrive tomorrow, and in the description. Thanks for watching, liking, sharing, and let me know your thoughts or which autobiography I should look at next.